Welcome to One Bills Lite, the make the jump to light speed version of our daily show, One Bills Live, where we give you everything you need on the Bills in 30 to 40 minutes. Coming up in our numbers game, Stefon Diggs as an all-time leader in receptions. NFL Network's Marc Ross talks to us about the restrictions of a reduced salary cap for the Bills and other NFL clubs. And then we also ask, would you believe it? Let's dial it up.
And it's Steve Tasker who has been all over the field.
Kind of unique. He was kind of a dual-role player for you. Steve! A balloon. Steve! A blimp? We're not even in the stratosphere of normalcy here. Thanks for joining us here on One Bills Lite, available on all your podcast platforms and on YouTube, where you can watch us as well as listen to us and subscribe, of course. Chris Brown, Steve Tasker with you. And Steve, the Bills' exciting 2020 season came to a close this past week when they couldn't keep pace with the Kansas City Chiefs, who are now going for a second straight Super Bowl title. What do you believe will most effectively close the gap for the Bills to compete and maybe even beat the Chiefs sooner rather than later?
As big a jump forward as they took offensively this year, I think the thing they got to do is get better offensively. You're not going to be able to defend all the speed that the Chiefs can put out on the field, at least not keep them off the scoreboard. You've got to keep pace with them offensively. I think Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce, Sammy Watkins, Mecole Hardman, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and the guy they've got pulling the trigger, the MVP, all of those things are spreads you so thin defensively, you could spend a lifetime trying to assemble that many parts to finally defend them. And I still don't know if you could get it done on a consistent enough basis. I think you've got to run with them, and it's an arms race. It's how many weapons you can put around Josh Allen, how effectively you can score points against any defensive philosophy. And I think the Bills would start by probably putting a little more speed on the field themselves.
Speed on the field. I know you and I are on the same page with this in terms of adding linemen too, because I think what they need to do is diversify their offense. They are a passing offense, first and foremost. That is their identity. There's no question about it. But in certain games where maybe their passing game wasn't hitting on all cylinders, it was very hard for their running game to pick up the slack at times. I think they have to do a better job, like Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott said in their wrap-up press conferences. They have to run the ball better, not necessarily more often. If they can run the ball better, and that's something they can turn to, maybe on days when their passing game isn't A+, I think that makes them a more dangerous offense overall.
And you're also in a point in history in the NFL where you don't just automatically bring back the guys you had last year. There could be some wholesale changes up in front of Josh Allen. Certainly Deion Dawkins is there for the time being, and Mitch Morse is there as well. Was at one point the highest paid center in the league. Feliciano is done with his contract. Darrell Williams, done with his contract. And then you've got Ike Butker. You've got Cody Ford at the other guard spot who's coming back off an injury.
Butker's restricted free agent.
All these guys are signaling the fact that the Bills are going to have to rebuild their offensive line from the studs up. I mean, they've got some holes to fill up front. That's job one, because you can't take a step backwards, go back to where you were in 2018, where Josh Allen had time to look at his first option and took off running because of the pressure. So the offensive line, certainly they've got weapons that can score points, but their offensive line not only has to be as good as it was in the passing game this year, it's got to be better, as you said, in the running game to give them more flexibility in games and for game planning and that kind of thing.
And there are going to be tough decisions. You have a restrictive salary cap that could get slightly better, but is still going to be far below what all the NFL clubs projected the cap to be in 2021 because of the COVID pandemic and the league's revenue losses therein as a result of the restrictions imposed by COVID and all the protocols that we witnessed here in 2020. So it's going to take some doing to figure out how to move all the puzzle pieces around and still fit it under the cap here.
Having said that, though, half the teams, let's say, in the league are going to be in the exact same spot that the Buffalo Bills are in. They're going to have to make some tough decisions about their own roster.
Yeah.
So there are going to be some quality guys available. And I think the key for the Bills and other teams like them is to free up enough money and assets to lure and entice them into an organization now for maybe some more of the deals we saw Darrell Williams sign, the 1-year deal, the 1 or 2 year deal, the short-term deals that will incentivize the guy not only to sign it, but to play well under it so that he can get another swing at the fence next year when the salary cap, for all intents and purposes, will be much higher than it is this
Goes
year.
back to normal.
There'll be
hopefully.
more money to go around for all these guys.
All right, so as we put a bow on the Bills' 2020 season, Steve, we make Stefon Diggs the subject of our numbers game this week. Steve, Stefon Diggs with 20 receptions this postseason, the Bills' number 1 wide receiver, is tied for second all-time in NFL history for most catches in a single season, counting regular season and postseason all together. His reception total for both was 147 catches. Steve, I am challenging you in the numbers game to name the other 4 receivers in the top 5 for most receptions, regular season, and playoffs in 1 year.
Here we go. You ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Jerry Rice.
Jerry Rice is not on this list. I was stunned.
Marvin Harrison.
Marvin Harrison, the Hall of Famer, is tied with Stefon Diggs for second place, 147 receptions back in 2002.
I will say, now I can't think of it. The guys with St. Louis.
The greatest show on turf
right,
you're talking
one
about?
One of those guys got to be in there. Isaac Bruce.
Isaac Bruce is not on the list.
Really?
Yeah.
What about Torrey Holt?
He is not on the list either. And I think it's because they kind of canceled each other out.
Wow, that's a crusher.
Nobody was I will tell you this. The 3 remaining guys are all pretty modern.
Right.
Pretty modern. So
I'm with you.
I'll tell you this. After 2010, if that helps you.
Yeah, I got you. I'm going to say Edelman.
Not Julian Edelman. But someone of a similar skill set.
How about...
You'll know it if I
yeah.
have to say the name, but
I'll say... catches... hold on. Hang on.
It's on the tip of my
Alvin
tongue.
Kamara.
It is not Alvin Kamara.
gotta
These
be a
are
wideout.
all receivers.
Okay.
All receivers.
All right. Golly, this is hard. I'm going to say... Who would it be?
Think of ultra productive receivers that had a monster year.
Larry Fitzgerald.
Not Larry Fitzgerald. Total receptions, regular season, and playoffs, the most productive years ever. So we have Stefon Diggs and Marvin Harrison, both with 147. They are both tied for second on this list.
Welker.
Wes Welker. Good job, Steve. 2011, 141 total receptions.
I got tightness in my
Regular-
chest over this one.
Regular season and postseason. So now you also want to think about teams that obviously won at least one playoff game. So this guy not only had to have a good season,
you got to go deep.
He had to, play a couple of playoff games too.
I'm going to say Golden Tate.
Not Golden Tate.
For the Seahawks, I figure maybe. Who else has been there? Nobody on the Patriots has done that for them.
Wes Welker was the guy that did it, 2011.
Yeah,
for
but
New
was he
England.
he was with New England.
Yes, he was.
Okay.
He's the only Patriot on the list, if that helps you weed out some people.
Oh, hold on. How about Antonio Brown?
Antonio Brown, 2015. Good job, Steve. 143 total receptions for Pittsburgh.
All right, and I'm looking for the top guy, right?
You are looking for the number 1 guy on the list. It'll make sense if I say it, so I don't want to say it.
Somebody like DeAndre Hopkins.
Not DeAndre Hopkins, but
he only went,
the same kind of ballpark here, same genre. Multiple target guy every single week.
DeAndre. I'm going to say Tyreek.
Not Tyreek
He
Hill.
didn't get that many catches. I
No.
don't think,
These big plays, a lot of yards, a lot of touchdowns, but
exactly.
not a lot of receptions.
I'm thinking a guy like, who's the guy on the Tennessee? He wasn't A.J. Brown last year.
Was not A.J. Brown, no.
Was Chiefs.
This guy absolutely crushed it across the board, and I don't want to give you the year because I think that gives it away.
Give me the year. I don't know.
It was last year, 2019. Guy crushed it last year. Did not have as good a year this year because he was injured.
He's a wideout.
Yes.
I don't know who's the
NFC.
Who's the wideout for the Niners? What's his name?
Not the Niners guy.
Really?
Nope. It is not
hold on.
not
It
Deebo
was
Samuel.
guy from the Rams, right?
Not from the Rams. NFC South, and it's not Julio Jones.
It's Mike Thomas.
Michael Thomas. That's right. 156 receptions.
I remember that now.
Regular season and playoffs. Unbelievable. You did pretty good though, Steve.
Oh, man.
You got three out of the four that were left.
Getting Welker really made me feel better.
That was a good one because that's the one furthest in the past here. Not bad.
Wes has been retired for seems like forever.
A little bit, yeah. The concussions caught up with him. Yeah. Our next numbers game challenge, Steve, also involves Stefon Diggs. With 77 receiving yards in the AFC title game last week, he compiled 1,846 yards in the regular season and the playoffs, becoming only the 13th player in league history with 1,800 receiving yards or more. Now, what's interesting, Steve, is of the 12 others who have done that, besides Diggs, only 2 of the other 12 come from AFC clubs. Okay, so can you name the 2 other AFC receivers besides Stefon Diggs who put together 1,800-yard receiving seasons, regular season, and playoffs?
Antonio Brown.
Antonio Brown is one, correct.
Marvin Harrison.
He's not Marvin Harrison. And this, I'm going to tell you, Steve, this is tough because it goes back a ways.
Does it?
Yes. So Antonio Brown is correct. He did it twice. 2015, the year we mentioned for the receptions in the previous numbers game, and in 2014. So he has the all-time number, 1,953 yards.
He does?
Yeah, 2015 for regular season and playoffs in one season.
Really?
It's Antonio Brown.
Oh, okay.
2015.
Wow.
And he did it in 2014, 1,815 yards. So you have one guy left on this list, AFC receiver, 1,800 yards or more, regular season and playoffs combined. And to help you, I am going to give you the year, 1999.
Isaac Bruce?
It is not Isaac Bruce.
Oh, that's AFC.
AFC. So you got to think of the team, that was really good, a team that was really good in the AFC because he's not on the Titans. So who lost to the Titans in the AFC playoffs that year? Do you remember the team? Because a lot of people thought this team should have been in the Super Bowl, not the Titans. But they could not get past the Titans that year because they played them in the regular season and lost also.
I got you. Hold on. It was Jacksonville Jaguars.
Yes, they lost to him all 3 times.
Muhsin Muhammad.
It is not Muhsin Muhammad. He played for Carolina.
Who's the other guy? Not Muhsin Muhammad.
That AFC team.
It was the Jacksonville
Jaguars. They had 2 good receivers on that team.
I don't know. I'm never going to get it.
You know it.
I don't know who it is. Who is it?
Keenan McCardell was the one guy. Who was the guy on the other side? Oh, come on. You know
Jimmy Smith.
There you go. I knew you knew it. Nice job, Steve. Jimmy Smith.
Yep.
1,864 yards.
No idea about that. That's unbelievable.
I'm still amazed by that Jacksonville had a loaded team that year. Coughlin's coaching, and they could not beat the Titans. They lost all 3 times. Twice in the regular season, once in the playoffs.
15-3, all 3 losses to the Titans.
Jeff
Fisher, Titans.
The Titans were their kryptonite that year.
They were 15-3 against the entire NFL, and they lost.
That sucks.
They lost 3 times to the Titans.
God help us that let that not be the Chiefs for the Bills going forward because they got to play the Chiefs in the regular season.
There's a lot of people that are wondering that.
Well,
about
right. The Bills are not alone in that.
We're not alone.
Well, that was a fun number. That might have been our most fun numbers game so far. You killed it, Steve. That was really good.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like I killed it.
Time now for our guest this week, NFL Network Analyst Marc Ross, former front office executive who worked for the Eagles, Bills, and Giants. And we talked to him about what this unique NFL offseason could look like with the restrictive cap.
Joining us on the line right now is a former NFL personnel executive with the Giants and Eagles. I think this guy was a college scouting director, Steve, at age 27. That is insane. But now with NFL Network and breaking down the league for a lot of people, and he'll do that here for us now, it is one Marc Ross joining us. Mark, how you doing? It's off-season time. This is when people that are in positions like the ones you held are just getting to work now, right?
Exactly. Everybody thinks the season's over. Like, all right, what do you do now? I was like, actually a lot busier than it was during the season. But Chris, don't forget, I did a 3-year bid up there in Buffalo.
Oh yeah, I remember.
Yeah, don't. That's the most important 3 years of my life right there.
Look at you. Look at you. He's laying the butter on already here. Look at that. Yeah, Steve and I have been knocking around, a lot of these tough decisions that are going to have to be undertaken by a lot of front offices around the league. And with this COVID-induced cap that has kind of gripped the entire league, obviously some teams are in a lot worse positions than others. But even Brandon Beane today in his season wrap-up conference via Zoom with the media today, Mark, was saying they are going to be faced with some tough decisions. And this is a team that has made a point since he and Sean McDermott have taken over of remaining cap strong. But even this COVID pandemic situation is going to put the Bills in a tough spot this offseason.
Yeah, definitely. Well, this is, again, the offseason what every team faces with the cap. And what are the reasons for that? One, you got a bunch of good players that you've had to pay over the years. That should be the reason why you may be over the cap. Or you make some bad contracts and you pay guys that you shouldn't have paid. So it just all depends on which team you're talking about and why they're in the cap situation that they're in. But how do you rectify that? You got to restructure some deals. You have to make the tough decisions to cut players that you don't want to cut or get out of some bad deals that you had before. And as you mentioned with the state of the flux with what is the salary cap going to be next year because of COVID, then you have to deal with those sort of machinations and have your cap guys make sure they're strong and everybody's on the same page of, all right, prioritize the players we must keep, the players we can work around, and the players that we have to get rid of to get back strong.
And that kind of boils down to, this offseason where think about this as well, Mark. I mean, you've got a team like Buffalo or some other teams that are right around where the cap is going to be. They anticipated being well under, but now they're going to be right at it. And there are going to be some teams that have a lot of money to spend and some other teams that have got are going to be the other end of it. So you've got on the bottom of the spectrum, you got teams like, the Saints, the Philadelphia Eagles, these teams that are really struggling with their cap numbers, having to jettison players. You've got other teams like the Dolphins, the Jets, the
Jacksonville.
Jacksonville, the Patriots. They can buy those players, and then you got the ones in the middle that are just like Brandon Beane said today. You just hope you draft well, because you're going to have to replace guys. Everybody wants to draft well. I get that, but there's going to be a huge shift in some great players that are going to go to teams or migrate to teams with money to spend.
No question. And you see it every year, and you see some guys get paid. Like, why did that guy get paid? Well, the money's there, and that's what the free market is to pay this certain player. And I'm sure some guys that'll leave the Bills, and it most happens with teams that are really good, and some of those fringe players for those teams are good players will get overpaid from some of those rising teams because they think, okay, well, that's the formula. We need to get that guy who's been part of a winning culture, and he can change our culture and change our team and add to the winning culture of our team. So you'll see that where you guys or the Saints, for example, talked about the teams that drafted well and have a lot of good players, and that's why they're in a cap situation where the guys will leave the Saints and get overpaid. So you'll see that kind of switch. Some will be justified, some won't be, but that's just what the market is, and that dictates what the players should get. And with the NFL players, the short lifespan of an NFL player, I don't blame those guys that get what they can get while they can, but it should be trying to get to the best situation for them, their career, and the fit of trying to win. But hey, some guys got to get paid as well.
Yeah, and I don't want to throw Western New York into a panic with this because, Buffalo isn't in quite the scorched earth scenario that a team like New Orleans or Philadelphia might be in right now with their cap situations. They're right there. I mean, they're within $6 million of where 175 is anticipated to be. But still, the fact remains that their three other division rivals are in healthier cap situations because they're at a different juncture in their build, per se. New England bit the bullet this past year on the cap. to get their house in order, and now they'll have money to spend. Miami is in a healthier cap situation than Buffalo, and so too are the Jets, who are starting anew with another new head coach. So when you think about those dynamics, it's hard not to think, Mark, that very quickly they can close the gap on Buffalo just because they're in a healthier cap situation than the Bills are faced with because of this COVID situation. So could you see a scenario where those teams, if they make the right decisions, could close the gap maybe sooner rather than later in a normal offseason?
Yeah, well, again, the closing the gap with the cap, obviously there's other factors besides the cap. You got to draft well, you got to sign the right free agents, not just spend the money. But most importantly, with the advantage that the Bills have is the quarterback. So you mentioned those other three teams. Sam Darnold hasn't shown it. Now the Jets have the second pick. Will there be a quarterback there to close the gap for you guys? New England, they have nobody at quarterback right now. Who knows and where they're picking? Don't think they'll really get one. The free agent market for quarterbacks not that strong. And in Miami, is he the guy? There's obviously the Dolphins have come out in the offseason and said that he is, but there's a lot of question marks about that. So they can have the cap space, but can they do enough around the quarterback situation to close the gap with you guys with Josh Allen? And right now I'm looking at it and I don't think they can. Now, maybe a couple years down the line if they can get the quarterback, because that's the key to everything, as you guys have seen there in Buffalo with Josh and his development. And 2 years ago, you're saying something completely different than you're saying now with being in the AFC Championship game with him. So that's the key, where the quarterback brings everybody up, brings the level of everybody up. Those other three teams in the division right now do not have that. So I don't care how much cap space they got, if they can't make that competitive with the Bills with Josh Allen, then it won't be that fast of a turnaround.
Well, you brought it up, Josh Allen, and probably he's going to get extended by the Buffalo Bills, no question. And what's your observations about how different teams in the league handle that? You look around, extremes are fairly obvious. Carson Wentz, who was an MVP candidate until he went out of that year, and the team went on and won the Super Bowl after he had gotten them all those wins early in the season. Then you've got a guy like Dak Prescott, who went ahead and played under the franchise tag. You got Kirk Cousins, who did that, played under the franchise tag. Alex Smith, who has bounced around the league as a top pick. What's your observation and thoughts about how teams should handle and when they should extend a young quarterback like a Josh Allen, like a Baker Mayfield, a Deshaun Watson, Patrick Mahomes? We've seen all these guys.
Yeah, I think the guys that have been extended recently, you really have seen the evidence that they are franchise, perennial playoff, in some cases, a Patrick Mahomes, the greatest guy ever, those sort of caliber people. But you've seen mistakes, especially that you mentioned Carson Wentz, but Jared Goff, where, teams should extend guys early, but are you really evaluating that quarterback for his value as opposed to, okay, we just have to extend him right now? And, talking about Jared Goff, when you're talking about, okay, if we have a good offensive line and we run the ball and our defense plays well, and we've got playmakers at receiver, he can get it done. Well, then you're saying, well, what actually is he doing? Is he worth that? As opposed to, if you look at Josh Allen, you're like, he didn't have a running game. Obviously Stefon Diggs was a big thing, but when you watch him play, you're like, wow, he's the reason why that offense is going, as opposed to we need everything else to prop up the quarterback. And the quarterbacks that make everything go are the ones that should get paid. The ones you have to prop up, I don't believe should be paid, and you just get caught up and we have to do it. You mentioned Dak Prescott as well. I mean, you saw his value. There was a lot of, is Dak worth it? Is he worth it? He lit it up earlier in the year, and then he got hurt. And he really showed, man, he is worth it. That, the team kind of fell apart without him. So it'll be interesting to see what Dallas does with him. But if he can't get paid, then nobody should.
So, Mark, if you look at the quarterback landscape, and I know there's some national reporters that have already said we're going to see, if you thought last year's quarterback musical chairs was active, it's going to be even to a greater degree this year. Some have even said upwards of 18 different quarterbacks could be on the move. That seems like a really high number to me. I can wrap my head around 10 or 12, which to me would even be seismic in terms of quarterback movement. But it looks like the Rams have buyer's remorse, and it looks like there are some other teams out there that are saying to themselves, if I don't have a top 5 guy, I should look for better because I'm not going to have a chance to compete. So do you think that line of thinking is prompting this potential movement that we could witness this offseason?
Yeah, no question. And it's always been the supply and demand with quarterbacks where there's not been enough great quarterbacks to go around. And the value of quarterbacks have been undervalued for all these years, in my opinion. And every year I've been in this, like, it's the most important position in sports, and it's not even close. And it's like you need one of these elite guys to get into entry into this deal. Okay, now you can have a year or two where your defense plays out of their mind and you got an average guy and but if you want to compete year in and year out, the only way to do it is to have a Patrick Mahomes, a Josh Allen, a Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson needs a lot, but that's a whole nother subject what he needs. But at least you have that guy to work with. And I think teams are, for some reason, have undervalued the value of a franchise quarterback. And now you're going to see it this offseason where let's say 8 elite guys that say we're going in next year knowing that this guy can do it for us. And all these other teams are saying they can't. And again, I just mentioned, we talked about maybe 18. We talked about the AFC East. There's 3 right there that, Sam Darnold hasn't shown it. Are they going to take another guy? That could be turned around. New England, they have to because they have no quarterback. And is Tua the guy? Will they go back and forth with Fitzpatrick or draft someone else because they're picking so high? So, and if you just go team by team around the league, there's not many that you can count on and say, we feel like we really have the guy to compete.
Yeah, you also got to know, too, that there's a lot of really young quarterbacks, particularly in the AFC, that have come out and played really well. And Pat Mahomes is a great example. His second year was the MVP of the league. Lamar Jackson, in his year, was the MVP of the league. And Pat Mahomes is now Super Bowl MVP. Josh Allen took him 3 years to get there, but he steadily got there. Then you got Joe Burrow coming out, lighting it up a little bit as a rookie. Justin Herbert doing the same thing. Yep. You've got guys that – and I know it's how important the position is, but the game has changed as well. It seems that the pro game has bent itself to be a little bit more like the college game in order to get better play out of that position.
No question. And you still, growing up in scouting, it was always the NFL. It was trickled down almost, okay? And you tried to force those college guys into what the NFL was doing. But slowly, finally, they said it trickled up where the concepts that colleges are doing, the pro teams are accepting, and the better teams with more creative offensive coordinators and head coaches like you guys, Brian Dable. I mean, the stuff he does there is for him to develop Josh and not do certain things with him throughout the year so he could develop and then work on his strengths. That's what you need. It's not, he can't do this, we're going to try to make him keep practicing this to do this. What are his strengths that we can maximize our offense with? And you're seeing more and more of that. I think it's just been that group of extremely talented players that have unique skill sets. You mentioned all those guys, and they're all kind of different in their own way, but they had a system that worked with their strengths as opposed to trying to dismiss that. But again, it's still a certain amount. And if you go year by year, it's still only a pocket of like under 10 that you're saying, here's the elite group of quarterbacks. Now it just happens to be a whole bunch of really young guys. Now we got Tom Brady and Drew Brees who are kind of hanging on there, and Aaron Rodgers, but the elite group right now just happens to be a lot of really young players, Kyler Murray in the NFC and, those sort of players.
What are some of your observations about this hiring cycle and also about the diversity too? I mean, it just seems like we spend too much time lamenting the fact that the league is dominated by so many, worthy, upstanding, great black guys who don't seem to get the same shot as young guys who come up who happen to be white. Is there what are your thoughts about that and the diversity in the hiring cycle?
No, obviously this is a subject that's, very passionate for me, and you see it in the head coaching side and on the general manager side for so many years. And I work with the league office with a lot of the diversity initiatives trying to rectify it. You thought after all the attention and the awareness that got brought to it, prior to this cycle because of what's happened the last few years that you'd see more of a change, but obviously it hasn't, as we haven't seen someone hired. And the frustrating part is someone like a Leslie Frazier or Eric Bieniemy, where you see the qualifications, you see the credentials, you see the background, but then it's always, well, they don't do this, they don't do that. But then white candidates they can just get hired without having to do all that. And it's always the one thing they do is magnified of something great. And I mean, you just look at, there's 3 black coordinators in the Super Bowl right now, like Brian Leftwich, Bieniemy, and then Todd Bowles. Actually, Tampa has their special teams coordinator, Keith Armstrong, as well. So that's the frustrating part. And then when you see Brandon Staley get hired right from Division III, 4 years later, he's a head coach in the NFL. That would never happen with a black. They wouldn't even be a position coach with that sort of resume. Or you see a Dan Campbell. Eric Bieniemy doesn't call plays. Well, Dan Campbell has never even been a coordinator. And then you see the press conference talking about biting kneecaps. And if that was, black candidates, they would get torn down completely by that stuff instead of exalted. So that's the frustration where, black candidates just want it to be fair and equal, and the same standards apply to both sides. No handouts and all that, but just don't say you can't do this. But then a white candidates completely do not have close to what the credentials are, and they're getting hired. So obviously it didn't work this cycle. We need to keep working on it, and we need to keep fighting. And hopefully in time it'll change.
You're talking about 2 out of what I think it was 7 vacant head coaching jobs that would be filled by minorities, Robert Saleh being the other minority hire. And then at the GM level, it was basically Terry Fontenot at Atlanta, correct? That's the only.
Terry and Brad Holmes got hired in Detroit.
Right.
Yeah.
And then in Washington, Martin Mayhew. So
Martin kind of after the fact with Marty Herning at first, and then they brought Martin in. So it's been, that was a lot more progress on the GM side, but again, there's still only 5 in the league, or 4 total GMs in the league. So, this was a big push on that side, but the total numbers are still way down. So, it's a lot of work. And you mentioned that the 3 candidates there, it's just their background and credentials. They've been around it so long.
Well, they're all over 50 years old too. Yeah. Like you're talking about a 37-year-old getting hired in LA, who's, as you said, 4 years removed from Division III. I mean, what more does Bieniemy or Leslie Frazier, who's been a head coach before? Exactly. I mean, they're all over 50 years of age. They've paid their dues, right? I mean,
paid their dues. And when you look at the good head coaches, black candidates have had to have played in the NFL for a while, coached for a long time, and then they're brought up. There's never go from A to Z real quick to get a job or get considered for even a coordinator job, let alone a head coaching job. So even for a coordinator job, and just comparing, let's just say, what Byron Leftwich has done, just the fact that Houston interviewed Josh McCown and Jim Caldwell on the same day, that to me was the biggest discrepancy. If people can't see the difference of a former player who has never coached at college or the NFL at any position, the same day interviews as a guy that, all right, he was a head coach in college at Wake Forest. He's coached 30 years. He went to a Super Bowl. He took one of the worst organizations in the history of football and had 3 winning seasons and playoff team. And they interview for the same exact job. There's nothing else that you could compare to say, this man right here has all these credentials. This guy has none. But they're being considered, and those are the sort of discrepancies we have to rectify.
Right, and I would agree. I'm glad you brought that to light. I got. Let's see. I want to ask you this. We talked about these young quarterbacks, and I want to get your observations on what do you look for when it's not Josh Allen or Justin Herbert or Joe Burrow or Pat Mahomes or Kyler Murray or something? What happens when it's like Tua Tagovailoa or Sam Darnold? When do you say thanks for stopping by, but we got to move on? I mean, you know what I mean? Because if the Bills would have been quick to the trigger, they would have kicked Josh Allen to the curb after halfway through his rookie year or something like that. You know what I'm saying? Statistically.
Yeah, I think with quarterbacks, there's always, you can see something there. You can see this guy, and even with Josh, when he struggled early, to me, you could just see there was something there that kind of kept going and going and going. It's like there was that playmaking element that he had, despite some of the tossing the ball behind him and the interceptions he had. But there was still that gravitas, that moxie that he had that you thought you could develop, whereas some other guys don't show that, and you're trying to force them to have it, or thinking, again, as I mentioned earlier, putting all these other things around them, and then they'll be better. whenever you're talking about those sort of things, it generally doesn't work. Now with Josh, when you guys brought Stefon Diggs in there, it did help, but he had already shown enough to say, okay, he has this in him. This will just help him out, as opposed to, well, kind of when Justin Herbert, when you watched him early, you just saw it. Whereas at Tua, in my eyes, and I wasn't a big Tua proponent coming out of college, I was kind of, in the minority with that. But even when you watch him this year, you're like, this is the guy that everybody's been talking about, that's the greatest quarterback of all time. You just don't see a lot of special traits or qualities with him. And the organization really has to be honest with that. And you see this a lot with older quarterbacks as well, where they're on the decline and you're thinking they're going to get it back. They're going to get it back. You saw that with Ben Roethlisberger this year in Pittsburgh, whereas he's going back. Once those guys kind of hit the cliff and go down, they're not coming back. And teams have a hard time being honest with that and assessing it and saying, we have to try to move on. I was with the Giants during Eli Manning's last years, and there's no more beloved figure for an organization of any team in history than Eli Manning is with the New York Giants, certain fan base, especially with the ownership and the organization. So it was so hard for a lot of people to say, you know what, this guy can't do it anymore. And that's when teams make mistakes. And you see it year in and year out. And again, Ben, I guess they're going to bring him back next year too, instead of saying, wow, I don't know if we can get it done. So You have to be honest with your assessments, see what you see on the film and not grade and make decisions with emotionally or with your heart.
Yeah, I know our time is tight here, but I did want to squeeze this last one in just because of your draft season expertise. Again, COVID is going to make this a different kind of draft prep offseason than we've ever seen before. We heard Brandon Beane earlier today talking about how they can only have 10 guys go to the Senior Bowl. They got to get tested every day. Virtual interviews for draft prospects. The pro days are going to take on an enormous amount of importance, but it's hard for me not to remember an old comment by Buddy Nix, a longtime guy in the scouting world, as you well know, Mark, who said, I need to smell their breath. And it sounds ridiculous, but he's right. Like, you have to read a prospect's body language in an interview setting. You don't get that in a Zoom interview. How are they going to work around all of the hurdles that stand in their way to make the same kind of educated decisions in a process that is largely a crapshoot to begin with?
Yeah. Well, you can look at that both ways where, Buddy says that comment and scouts always say that, but there's been a lot of mistakes too. I mean, half the first round is not working. So maybe this is a better way that teams will say, let's be more efficient and effective and look at different ways to do it. And just like they've had to adapt throughout the regular scouting season with how they've had to evaluate teams, they're going to have to even do it more throughout this season. So I'm through the postseason with all-star games and the combine and pro days. And all right, how can we get an edge on other teams? Let's not say we can't do these things. How can we maximize this process that we're in right now and do it better than what other teams are doing, as opposed to being crippled by the process? And again, a lot of times, to me, always the essence of scouting is the film. And the further away you get from the season through this process, and I've been a part of 20 plus years of scouting, the further people get away from the film and all these other factors start coming into the 40 times, the vertical jumps, the interview process, the psychological test, you get away from what the real essence of what a player is. And it's interesting. I just watched the Alabama receivers back-to-back, Devontae Smith, who you guys all know about, and Jalen Waddell. And throughout this process, the further you get away from the film of Devontae Smith, you're going to start hearing more and more about Jalen Waddell, because he's going to run a fast 40, he's going to vertical, he's going to do all these things. And people are going to start saying, even though this guy that won the Heisman and had all this and dominated, this teammate of his is going to be a better prospect. So that's just one example I just wanted to bring up. Right. But I think the essence of film, the teams that have better evaluators of the film, I think they'll prosper throughout this.
Super, Mark.
Right.
As always, Mark. Thanks for the time. Always
Appreciate
pleasure to talk to you. And we look forward to maybe catching up with you again before we get to full-blown draft season.
Sure, let's do it. Appreciate you guys having me on.
All right, we wrap up this week's edition of One Bills Lite with a new segment that we call Would You Believe It? It's almost a page out of the old Van Miller playbook. Do you believe it? So, but instead we change it a little. Would you believe it?
All right.
So I present Steve with a trend or percentage figure from the NFL, and then I ask him, would you believe it? So all Steve really needs to do here is assess whether the trend or figure sounds credible. Steve, are you ready?
All right.
Okay, so first up, Travis Kelce is already set.
You're going to set you're going to say something.
I'm going to set you up for something, and you tell me whether it's credible or
I
not.
gotcha. All right.
Okay? So first up, Travis Kelce has already set the single-season record for most receiving yards by a tight end in the regular season and the playoffs. He has 1,703 this season, and obviously he can add to that total in the Super Bowl. The guy he passed is a guy he will face in the Super Bowl, Rob Gronkowski, who had 1,585 yards. So, Steve, would you believe it if I told you in league history, Travis Kelce already has 4 of the top 5 receiving yardage totals by a tight end regular season and playoffs? 4 out of the 5. Would you believe it?
4 out of the top 5 seasons in history for a tight end.
Receiving yards,
total
regular
receiving.
season, and playoffs. He's
4
got
of the top 5?
4 of the top 5. Would you believe it, Steve?
Now, wait a minute. He had a 1,700-yard
This year.
and that passed
Gronkowski.
You had 1,585. So he passed it by 118-yard, 20.
Right. So he has to have the other 3 in the top 5 as well.
And he crushed that by over 100. I would say I would believe that.
Okay, well, I kind of tricked you a little bit. It's not true, but he does have 3 of the top 5.
Wow.
He doesn't have 4 of the top 5, but he's got 3. Okay, so
Wow.
Travis Kelce, 1,703 this season, and that number's going to go up. Okay.
Right.
Then Rob Gronkowski, as I said, 1,585 in 2011. There was another tight end in 2011, Jimmy Graham.
Sure.
New Orleans.
With the New Orleans, yeah.
1468. Travis Kelce in 2018, 1467. Travis Kelce in 2019, 1436. He's got 3 of the top 5, Steve. 3 of the top 5. That is
And
bananas.
this year's the record.
Yes.
So he's getting better.
He's. I mean, he could have 1,800. He could be in the 1,800-yard club that we did for the numbers game.
Yeah.
As a tight end, he'd be
put
the
together-
only
what
tight
is this?
end.
Is his 5th year?
I think it's his 8th season.
Year?
He's
in the
30
Hall
years
of-
old.
He's going to go to the Hall of Fame.
Oh, yeah. No, I think that's a done deal,
He's gonna
Lucille.
go to the Hall of Fame for that.
Done deal already.
That's unbelievable. Good for him. Wow.
All right, so last would you believe it for you, okay?
All right.
Josh Allen, I found this stat. Josh Allen, when holding the ball for 4 seconds or more, was sacked 15% of the time. But that was the lowest percentage in the NFL. Would you believe that? Would you believe that being sacked 15% of the time is the lowest percentage in the NFL when holding the ball for 4 seconds or more? Okay? For reference, in 2019, Josh Allen was sacked on 30% of the dropbacks. Okay?
That he held on to
So
the
he
ball.
cut his percentage of getting sacked when holding the ball for 40 seconds or more in half this year.
4 seconds, not 40.
But do you think 15% is the lowest percentage in the NFL? Would you believe that Josh Allen is the best at holding the ball for 4 seconds or long and not getting sacked, basically, having the lowest sack percentage? Would you believe it?
I would say no. I would not say he's the least sacked. Well, I don't know. He didn't sack too much when he held on to it. No, I'm going to say no. I would not believe it. I think there's somebody who got sacked at a lower rate than that because like guys like Aaron Rodgers and that they throw it away a lot more than Josh does, and Josh takes that occasional bad. Well, he took a couple of them in the Kansas City game. So I'm going to say no. I do not believe it.
Believe it, Steve.
Really?
It was the lowest percentage in the NFL. So if you hold the ball for more than 4 seconds and you get and Josh only got sacked 15% of the time this year
While holding on to it for 4 seconds.
or more.
And that's lower than anybody.
That is the lowest figure in the league, which shocked me too, because logic would say, well, we've seen him get sacked when he holds on to it too
right.
long.
Plus
and
holding on to it for 4
tries
seconds.
to get away from people.
You
and
think he's going to at least throw it away. I guess he's gotten better at throwing it away too, because when you throw it away, it doesn't count as a sack. So, yeah, that's good on him.
Yeah. So he held it for 4 seconds or more 18% of the time.
No. Is that what it means?
Well, he held the ball for 4 seconds or more on almost 18% of his dropbacks.
Of his dropbacks, yeah.
That's the second highest rate in the league. So he held on to the ball for 4 seconds or more than almost anybody,
almost
but
1
yet
out
at
of
the
5
same
times.
time had the lowest sack rate of 15%.
Oh,
that's
good.
pretty amazing.
That's pretty good.
That's amazing.
That's why those wide receivers were doing a nice job, too. You got a lot
well,
of
scramble rules, right?
Scramble rules.
You know what I thought tell me if you saw this in the AFC title game. I felt like the Chiefs DBs had studied the scramble rules of the Bills. Is that something you can kind of pick up on film?
Yeah.
I really feel like they knew what the Bills' scramble rules are. And obviously, Josh rolling to the right a lot probably helped them scout that too, I would think.
And if you're doing it,
they plastered really well.
18% is almost 20%, like 1 out of every 5 dropbacks. You get a chance to look at it, and they can probably rehearse that, thinking at least 1 out of every 5 dropbacks, we're going to get a chance to get this guy in a scramble drill. We'll be able to, because then you're more confident sloughing off. Like if you got this guy and he's going to do something, you kind of think you can slough off.
Yeah.
And look around and find the guy whose rule you know and get
I was curious about that. I meant to ask you about that on the show.
Yes, I'm sure they
Didn't
can
get a
do
chance.
that. I'm sure they can do that. It's a smart thing to do, and teams will do that.
And when in doubt, you're facing the Buffalo offense. If you're not sure, go to the left because Josh is probably rolling out to his right. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And he started rolling out a little bit to his left, a little bit.
More.
And they had one where it was called where he beat the Patriots going to his left, but. Yeah, absolutely. They'll scout that out and find that out. You can decipher their rules and take advantage of them.
Yeah. Would you believe it? Yes, you have to. I still can't believe it. Held on to the ball for 4 seconds or more often than anybody else, but got sacked the least when doing it. Crazy. Like at two ends of the spectrum there. You wouldn't expect it, which was why it was a good example, a good one to use for would you believe it. But that will do it for this episode of One Bills Lite. We thank you for joining us. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. And remember, when there isn't enough time for One Bills Live on Monday to Friday, there is always enough time for One Bills Lite. For Steve Tasker, I'm Chris Brown. We'll see you next week.